Hi everyone, this is Alan Blay from Florida State University, and today what I'd like to do is walk through a simple example using IDEA data analysis software in teaching the revenue cycle in an introductory auditing course. And I'm going to use the revenue cycle examples from the IDEA workbook as a guide. So as an aid to instructors, Tim Lowers, Jerry Strasser, Dave Sinison, Jay Thibodeau, and I put together a white paper guide that can be used by professors as a supplement to our auditing textbook to help instructors effectively and efficiently implement IDEA into the classroom. If you found this video from a webinar, the white paper was provided with the webinar materials. But if not, feel free to contact me. You can just look me up at Florida State University for a copy of the latest version. Now the IDEA materials, what makes this pretty awesome is that the materials from IDEA, including the software and the workbook and the data, are all available for educational use from Automation. That's the company that makes IDEA. So if the students don't need a hard copy of the workbook, there's really no cost to them of using this. So now when you walk through one of the sections of our white paper, what you're going to see is that they're designed to guide an instructor in assigning examples. The IDEA workbook is 264 pages, and it's hard to work through. Trust me, I've done it. So say for the example you wanted the students to cover accuracy controls and evaluate credit authorization, the instructor guide that we put together explains what you would need to tell the students and a basic overview of what problems they would face. It also explains any issues that we've become aware of either through personal experience or using the assignments in class. And in this case, I tell my students to complete pages 26 to 49 of the IDEA workbook in order to import the client data and reconcile the data to the general ledger. So what our white paper should help you with is giving you the ability to guide your students. So for example, I tell my students to be careful to ensure that the data provided by the client is accurate. From doing just this one assignment, students get actual experience working with problems that can occur in client data sets of any size. And they also get experience using the equations editor, which is the tool used for almost all data extraction and comparison in IDEA. So this is another reason I try to use this as one of the most early examples of IDEA for my students. I want to emphasize that about 6 months ago, from when I'm making this, I had absolutely never used IDEA before. So this is not a software that really has huge barriers to use. Within a few days of trying it out, I was completely comfortable on it, and there's nothing like this when I practiced auditing. So, I'm an auditing professor, not an extreme data geek. So what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through the steps of this exercise just so you can see the buttons, because they're clearly outlined in the IDEA workbook, but sometimes they'll use a phrase that doesn't necessarily show up obviously in the software. So what I'd like to do is walk this through. So what I'm going to do is create a managed project. Whenever you want to start out a new project, that's what you're going to do. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to call this Accounts Receivable 2012. And you can see down here the managed project Accounts Receivable 2012. And I'm going to change the properties of it to show that this is the Accounts Receivable Audit. And it's for a quarterly period of January 1st, 2012 through March 31st, 2012. And that's the period of the data that we're given from the IDEA workbook. So now I've set the properties. The next thing I want to do is import the data. And with IDEA, the way you do that is by clicking the desktop button. So by clicking desktop, it's going to pull up an editor for me. Now what we're going to pull in this case, is an Access database. Okay, but so I'm going to click on an Access database because that's what the data our client gave us. Now one thing you're going to notice is when you pull it up, it's started a project for you and it goes to the source files and the data will not be there. So know where you've got your IDEA data on your computer, and I'm just going to go in here and here's the accounts receivable data within the workbook data files, and I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to put it over into this folder. And now that I've done that, I can open it. And so I'll click Next. And fortunately, since this is an Access file, it's very, very easy to do this. So I don't really have to change any of the formats on this. All I have to do, I'm going to get the field links set up and everything. And I'm going to call the output accounts receivable 2012 just to make it look nicer. And then I'll click OK, and it will import the data for me. And now we've got our data imported. And what you can see is down at the bottom it says there's 300 items here. And if I scroll down, you can see that you can look at them all in here. So next thing I'm going to do is go over to the property windows. Whenever you want to be working with the data button needs to be clicked on here. But in here, I'm going to go down and I'm going to get some control totals because I want to balance this up to what our client told us should be an accounts receivable according to the GL. So I'm going to get a control total, and I'm going to get a control total. We can just do the control total for the gross amount. And it's been calculated. It hasn't been calculated. Now I've calculated it. I've got a control total of $435,864. That's the amount that's in it. Now if I go into the field statistics, same thing as was going on before, I can look and I can see all of these. And here's what I can see is there's 300 records with a net value of $435,864. But if we go into the ideal workbook, on page 41 of the version 9 workbook, I can see that the client total is $369,255.13. But in the database, it's $435,864.85. Something's wrong. This is a great example. This is one of the reasons why I really like doing this with students early on, is because it's pretty clear something's wrong. It's pretty clear something's wrong, and this is common. It's very common when your client gives you data and it doesn't balance up perfectly to what you are expecting to see. So now we've got to figure out why. And I think a good way to do this is to go back to the data and you ask your students, why? Why is this data wrong? What's in there? It looks like there's too much. Right? The amount is too much. So which assertion are we dealing with here? Potentially the existence of accounts receivable. It's also the accuracy. So we're looking at a couple of things here. So what could be going on here that might be causing us problems? And I usually tell my students, look at the columns and see what you see here. There's a gross amount. There's some other columns that we'd have to ask our client what these things might be. It looks like they might be some sort of tax. And then we've got something called a paid flag. Some of these things seem to have a P in here, a paid flag. And we'd probably have to ask our client on this, but it looks like these might actually be paid. This may be a listing of all the sales that were put into accounts receivable, and some of them, especially ones near the beginning of the period, right, and you can see it's mostly ones during the beginning of the period, seem to have that P in the paid flag, which probably means those are paid. And another thing about this, we're looking at, these are supposed to be accounts receivable as of March 31st. It looks like there might be something in here where the date of the sale didn't occur until April 1st. That one also shouldn't be in there. So let's try to get rid of this. Let's try to fix this and see if we can make it so that the data balances up, which is something we often have to do. So what we're going to do is do an analysis. So within the Analysis tab, we're going to go to a direct extraction. Now what a direct extraction does is it creates a new database that has the records from this database that meet the criteria that we want. So we're going to do a direct extraction, and we're going to call this thing in here, we'll call this accounts receivable, accounts receivable, and we're going to call this one March 31st, 2012, because that's what we want. And then what you have to do is click the equation editor. Now, that's all it says in the IDEA workbook. The equation editor is actually this calculator button here. So what we're going to do is click on this equation editor, and it's going to pull up this very nice WYSIWYG equation editor. Once you get a hang of this, it becomes pretty simple to use. So the first thing that we want to do is get rid of any items where the paid flag is equal to where the paid flag has a P in it. Now the interesting thing is what we're doing here is we're trying to select items. So we don't want the ones that have a P in it. So again, this is something you can tell your students, because they might try to query for the things that that have the P to find them, but what you want is all the ones that don't have it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the ones where the paid flag is not equal to, so it's where the paid flag is not equal to P. And then I want to also do another query. So the question I always ask my students in this is, if I want to get everything where the paid flag is not equal to P, is this an and I want to get everything where the date, I want to get everything where the date is before April 1st, right? So I want to get everything from where the date is before April 1st. Is this an AND query or an OR query? If I was trying to get anything where the paid flag wasn't P or the date was in the time, then I'd use an OR query. You'll be surprised how many students don't get this and will tell you the opposite. More in the other direction. A lot more of them will tell you it's an AND query when it's an OR query. In this case, it is an AND query because we want things that have both of these criteria. So the paid flag is not P, and we want this date, the date, to be less than April 1st. So it ought to be in there. In IDEA, the way you do dates is with the 8-digit, with the 4-digit year first, so 2012, 04, 01. So this is the query I think I want to run. I want to get all the items from here where the paid flag is not P, so it's not paid yet, and it should be in here. It's actually occurred. And I'll usually go and check this button to validate and make sure I've got the equation right, and it tells me it is, and at that point I'll click here and I'll get my new database. And now I have it. So this one, I can see the control total is 369, 255, 13, and if I go back to the IDEA workbook, 369, 255, 13, and I'm in good shape. So I've done this extraction, and now we're in good shape. One other thing I want to show you here is this History tab. This History tab is great documentation of what you've done. I've found that whenever a student is having issues, especially with the assignments that aren't straight from IDEA workbooks, so they don't have these step-by-step guides in front of them, but even if they do have a step-by-step guide for them, I ask them to go into the History tab and compare their extraction to what they should have done, and if they don't know why it isn't working, I just tell them, send me a screenshot, and often I'm able to fix it just from there. So in the history, I can go in here and I can see all these different things I've done. I pulled up a database. I changed the control field. I did a record extraction. What was the extraction criteria? Paid flag not equal to P. If I had done this wrong, I'd be able to go back in here and say, now I get it. I see what I did wrong. And that happens. That happens to everybody. I've done that many times in going through these problems. So now I've got this database here. And what I'd like to do next is I want to add a comment, because comments are great for documentation. When you go to print things out in here, you can print them to a PDF that can go into your work papers. It's into the file. It's very good to have. So I'm going to add a comment in here, and I'm just going to add a comment. And the comment, I'm just going to say that database reconciles to totals from client. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link this to this database by clicking this field, and I'm going to go in here and I want to link it within here to this smaller one, the 253 records. So I'm going to link it to that, and now it's linked to that. And now I can just close it. So this is very useful. I mean, this is definitely a very useful, see, database reconciles to totals from client, typo. But anyway, that's very useful. Before ending this video, I just want to demonstrate a couple other features that are used in the accounts receivable examples that are provided in the IDEA workbook, just to show how easy IDEA is to use once you've actually played around with it a little bit. So I'm going to go up here back into the Analysis tab, and I'm going to select Random. All right, and what I want to do is I'm going to select 20 items from it. And I'm going to leave the Allow Duplicate Records unchecked so I don't get duplicate records. And I'm going to put this Random Sample for confirmation because maybe that's what I want to do, or further testing. I select it, and I've got my random sample. That's a very useful tool. Another thing, here's another thing you can do that's extremely very useful. Now let's make sure, now I've done that, I need to go back and make sure this database is selected. Another great example, your students are going to have problems with this all the time, and probably you will also, because I've had problems with this all the time, is running things on the wrong data. Once you start getting a bunch of things opened, it's very easy to do it. So I click back over to here, and I'm going to use the Aging button. So Aging, I've got the right database selected. I always check a second time. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to change the aging date, not today, because that's not a point. So we're going to change this to 2012-4-1, because that's what we want to see the age as of. So we're going to do an age on there, and we can change the days to be whatever we want. You know, we can change them to show us whatever sort of interval we want to use. We'll use the date, which is the date. The amount of the field to total is that, and I can really change these number of days to almost anything that I want to do. So I can put 30, I can put 60, I can do pretty much whatever I want to do, but I don't want to do a 30, 60, 90 days because this is only for the first thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an aging interval with 15, 45. I know this is not something we typically would do, but just to show the example, 15, 45, 60, and 90. And these other ones I'm just going to clear out. And then when I click the aging, I'm going to get this aging, and it's going to show that less than 15 days is 113, 45 is 84 of the records, 60 of them 90 days, and greater than 90 days is 3 of them. And I can start looking at the totals, and I can use this for almost anything I want to do, right? And you can also, if you want to use this aging, there's plenty of other things that you can do with the aging. It's a very helpful tool within here. I can do a graph. This is something I often like to do and show my students. I can look at a graph, and this is very similar to what audit firms do. Is they create the data within there and then they graph them. And there's lots of different ways to graph within IDEA, and you can start looking for things that indicate risk. In this case, as I look at the number of records, I don't see too much, and I can also look at net value. I can see they sort of map. It's not as if all of the value is in the 90 days, or that would be 60 to 90 days, or in the 90 days plus. So there are lots of things you can do with this. There are lots of different activities. You can take attribute samples, you can do monetary unit sampling, you can use a pivot table, you can stratify a sample. There's all sorts of things that you can do in IDEA. If you're using other cycles, you can even do fraud detection for Benford's Law on the payables side. So there's plenty of things in IDEA, and I highly recommend using it in the classroom because a lot of the firms are using software that's either IDEA or similar to IDEA, and I strongly recommend that you use this in your auditing class.